You think you can handle real combat, Princess? Staff Sergeant Derek Voss's voice cut through the morning air at Fort Meridian as his fist connected with Private Alexis Kane's jaw during hand-to-hand combat training. The crack echoed across the dusty training ground as she hit the dirt hard, blood trickling from her split lip. "Stay down where you belong," he sneered, his combat boots inches from her face as the other recruits watched in stunned silence. But what Voss didn't know was that within 7 minutes, 4 full colonels would arrive at the training facility, and his 15-year military career would be over before lunch. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Private Alexis Kane lay motionless for exactly 3 seconds, her slender frame crumpled in the Nevada sand, dark hair spilling from beneath her training helmet. To everyone watching, she looked like just another recruit who had bitten off more than she could chew. The morning sun beat down on Training Ground Charlie at Fort Meridian, where Delta Company was conducting its weekly combat readiness assessment. 32 recruits stood in formation, their faces a mixture of shock and uncomfortable silence as they witnessed what appeared to be excessive force during a routine drill. Staff Sergeant Voss towered over the fallen soldier, his barrel chest heaving with exertion and satisfaction. At 6'3" with arms like tree trunks and a permanently scowling face, he had built his reputation on breaking recruits who thought they were tougher than they actually were. For 3 years running, he had been the lead combat instructor at Fort Meridian's Advanced Infantry Training Program, and his methods were legendary for their brutality. The other drill instructors called him the Hammer because he believed every problem looked like a nail that needed to be pounded into submission. That's what happens when little girls try to play soldier, Voss announced to the formation, his voice dripping with contempt. Maybe Daddy's connections got you through basic training, Kane, but out here in the real military, we separate the fighters from the pretenders. Several recruits shifted uncomfortably, knowing they were witnessing something that crossed the line from tough training into abuse. But none dared to speak up against a staff sergeant with Voss's reputation. Alexis slowly pushed herself up from the ground, wiping blood from her mouth with the back of her hand. She stood barely 5'6", with the kind of quiet presence that most people overlooked in formation. For the past 8 weeks of training, she had maintained perfect scores in marksmanship, tactical awareness, and physical fitness. But she carried herself with such unassuming modesty that even her fellow recruits barely noticed her achievements. She never boasted, never drew attention to herself, and always volunteered for the most difficult assignments without complaint. "Something wrong with your hearing, recruit?" Voss stepped closer, his face inches from hers. "I said stay down. This isn't a game for little girls who think they can play dress-up in army uniforms." His breath smelled like stale coffee and cigarettes as he grabbed her by the front of her training vest, lifting her slightly off the ground. "Your daddy might be some big shot who pulled strings to get you here, but Daddy isn't here to protect you now." The other recruits watched in growing discomfort as the situation escalated beyond normal training parameters. Private Marcus Thompson, a farm kid from Iowa, later recalled feeling sick to his stomach as he watched Voss deliberately humiliate Kane in front of the entire company. "We all knew something was wrong," he said. "Drill sergeants are supposed to be tough, but this felt different. This felt personal and cruel." Alexis met Voss's glare with steady brown eyes that showed no fear, no anger, and no surprise. It was as if she had been expecting this moment, had perhaps even been preparing for it. "No, sir," she replied quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "My hearing is fine." There was something in her tone, a controlled calmness that seemed oddly out of place for someone who had just been struck by a superior officer. "Then drop and give me 50 push-ups," Voss commanded, finally releasing his grip on her vest. "And while you're down there, think about whether you really belong in my army." He turned to address the rest of the formation, clearly enjoying the power dynamic he had established. Let this be a lesson to all of you. The enemy won't care about your feelings. The enemy won't go easy on you because you're small or weak or think you deserve special treatment. As Alexis dropped into push-up position, none of the observers noticed the small device clipped to her belt, beginning to blink red. It was barely visible beneath her equipment, a tiny indicator light that had been activated the moment Voss's fist made contact with her jaw. The device was military-grade, encrypted, and connected to a network that monitored the vital signs and location of certain high-value personnel 24 hours a day, 3 miles away. In the secure communications center of Fort Meridian's command headquarters, a priority alert flashed across multiple screens simultaneously. Technical Sergeant Linda Rodriguez, monitoring communications traffic during her routine shift, stared at her display in disbelief. The alert code was one she had never seen in her 8 years of service. A classification so high that it automatically triggered protocols reserved for only the most critical situations. "Ma'am," she called to her supervisor. Master Sergeant Patricia Holloway, her voice tight with confusion. "I'm seeing a Code 7 alert from Training Ground Charlie. The system is showing. This can't be right." Her hands trembled slightly as she read the information appearing on her screen. A Code 7 alert meant that someone with top-level security clearance was in immediate physical danger. The kind of clearance held by only a handful of people in the entire military structure. Master Sergeant Holloway rushed to Rodriguez's workstation, her face growing pale as she read the alert details. Without hesitation, she reached for the red phone that connected directly to the base commander's office. "Sir, we have a situation," she said the moment General Harrison answered. "We're showing a Code 7 alert from one of our training areas. According to the system, someone with Level 9 clearance is currently under physical assault. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. The general's response was immediate and decisive. "Lock down that training area. Nobody in or out. I'm scrambling the response team now." Within 90 seconds, 4 full colonels were racing across Fort Meridian in unmarked vehicles, their destination Training Ground Charlie, where a staff sergeant was about to discover that the quiet recruit he had just assaulted was someone he should never have touched. But as Alexis Kane continued her push-ups in the Nevada sand, her split lips still bleeding, her eyes remained focused on the ground, showing no hint of the storm that was racing towards Staff Sergeant Derek Voss's career. Private Alexis Kane had been assigned to Delta Company at Fort Meridian 8 weeks ago, arriving on a transport bus with 23 other recruits on a scorching Tuesday morning in August. From the moment she stepped off that bus, she had managed to accomplish something remarkable in a military environment designed to scrutinize every detail. She had become virtually invisible at 24 years old. Alexis possessed the kind of unremarkable appearance that allowed her to blend seamlessly into any formation. Her auburn hair was always regulation length, pulled back in a simple bun that never drew attention from inspecting officers. Her uniform was perpetually pressed to perfection, her boots polished to a mirror shine, and her equipment maintained with meticulous care that spoke of deep respect for military standards. Yet somehow, despite her flawless adherence to protocol, she managed to avoid standing out in any way that would invite scrutiny. The other recruits had dubbed her Ghost during their second week of training, not out of mockery, but from genuine bewilderment at her ability to excel without being noticed. Private Jennifer Walsh, her bunkmate from the beginning, later described the phenomenon. Alexis would score perfect marks on every test, complete every physical challenge, and volunteer for the hardest details. But somehow the drill instructors never seemed to really see her. It was like she had figured out how to be outstanding while remaining completely under the radar. Her background: according to the official records available to training personnel, was unremarkable to the point of being forgettable. Born in the small town of Riverside Falls, Montana, daughter of a retired park ranger and a high school librarian, graduated from Montana State University with a degree in international relations. No prior military service, no family connections to the armed forces, no special skills or training that would distinguish her from thousands of other college graduates seeking purpose and direction through military service. Staff Sergeant Derek Voss had initially paid no attention to Private Kane beyond ensuring she met basic training standards. In his experience, quiet recruits fell into two categories: those who were hiding weakness and would eventually crack under pressure, and those who were simply focused on completing their training without drama. He had assumed Kane belonged to the latter group, appreciating that she required minimal supervision and never caused problems that would reflect poorly on his training record. During weapons training, Alexis consistently scored in the top 5% of her class, but she did so without fanfare or celebration. While other recruits whooped and high-fived after hitting difficult targets, she would simply nod respectfully to the range instructor and prepare for the next drill. Her marksmanship scores were entered into the computer system without comment. Just another set of numbers that met the Army's exacting standards. In tactical exercises, she demonstrated an intuitive understanding of battlefield dynamics that impressed visiting instructors. But she always deflected praise by crediting her teammates or claiming she had been lucky. Captain Bradley Morrison, who oversaw advanced combat scenarios, noted in his weekly reports that Private Kane showed exceptional situational awareness and decision-making capabilities, but her humble demeanor prevented her achievements from generating the attention they might otherwise have received. Physical fitness presented no challenges for Alexis. Despite her slight build and unassuming appearance, she completed every running course within the top 10% of times, performed strength exercises with textbook form, and endured endurance challenges that left larger, more obviously athletic recruits struggling to keep up. Yet she accomplished these feats with such quiet efficiency that even her remarkable consistency failed to generate lasting notice from the training cadre. Her fellow recruits found themselves both impressed and puzzled by their enigmatic colleague. She was unfailingly helpful when others struggled with equipment or procedures, offering assistance with the kind of patient expertise that suggested extensive prior experience. Yet she never mentioned where or how she had acquired such knowledge. When Private Rodriguez struggled with field communications equipment, Alexis spent hours after official training ended helping him master the complex procedures, displaying familiarity with protocols that weren't covered in their basic curriculum. She knew things, Private Thompson later recalled. Not just book knowledge, but practical stuff that you only learn through real experience. How to maintain equipment in extreme conditions, how to move silently through different terrain, how to read weather patterns and tactical situations. But whenever someone asked where she learned something, she'd just smile and say she'd read it somewhere or seen it in a movie. The most curious aspect of Private Kane's time at Fort Meridian was her relationship with technology. While other recruits struggled with the increasingly sophisticated communications and navigation equipment that modern soldiers were required to master, Alexis operated these systems with an ease that bordered on intuitive understanding. She could troubleshoot malfunctions that stumped technical instructors, optimize performance settings that improved functionality beyond standard parameters, and adapt to new equipment variations without consulting manuals or seeking guidance. Master Sergeant Patricia Holloway, responsible for evaluating recruit progress, had noticed these anomalies in her weekly assessment reviews. Kane's file showed consistently exceptional performance across all training categories, yet somehow her name never appeared on commendation lists or special recognition rosters. It was as if someone had designed her military record to be exemplary but forgettable. outstanding but invisible. During off-duty hours, Alexis maintained the same low profile that characterized her training performance. She spent evenings in the barracks reading technical manuals and military history texts, participating in group conversations without dominating them, and helping fellow recruits with their studies. She never received personal mail, never mentioned family or friends from her civilian life, and never requested special leave or accommodations that might have provided insight into her background. The few personal details she shared were carefully mundane. She enjoyed hiking and outdoor activities, which explained her excellent physical conditioning. She had studied languages in college, which accounted for her familiarity with international military terminology. She had worked various jobs before enlisting, which might have explained her diverse skill set. Every explanation was plausible, reasonable, and completely unremarkable. What none of her fellow recruits or training instructors realized was that Private Alexis Kane's seemingly ordinary background was a carefully constructed facade, maintained by security protocols that existed at classification levels far above anything found at a standard Army training facility. Her real identity was protected by safeguards so sophisticated that even her presence at Fort Meridian had been coordinated through channels that operated entirely outside normal military assignment procedures. Small device clipped to her belt, now blinking its urgent red warning, was connected to those same security protocols. It monitored not just her location and vital signs, but any indication that her carefully maintained cover might be compromised. Staff Sergeant Voss's decision to strike her during training had triggered automatic responses that were already racing toward Training Ground Charlie, bringing with them revelations that would transform everyone's understanding of exactly who Private Alexis Kane really was. The morning routine at Training Ground Charlie had begun like every other Wednesday for the past 8 weeks. Delta Company assembled at 0600 hours sharp, their breath visible in the cool Nevada air as the sun crusted the mountains surrounding Fort Meridian. The scheduled activities included advanced hand-to-hand combat training, tactical movement exercises, and weapons maintenance. Standard curriculum designed to prepare recruits for the realities of modern warfare. Staff Sergeant Derek Voss had arrived 30 minutes early, as was his custom, to inspect the training area and review the day's objectives. The obstacle course had been reset from the previous day's exercises, combat mats arranged in precise formations, and training weapons checked for safety compliance. Everything appeared normal as Delta Company took their positions for morning formation. 32 recruits standing at attention while Voss conducted his customary inspection of uniforms and equipment. Private Alexis Kane had taken her usual position in the third row, second from the left, a spot she had occupied consistently since arriving at Fort Meridian. Her uniform bore the same meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything about her military presentation. Pressed creases sharp enough to cut paper, boots reflecting the morning sunlight, equipment arranged with geometric precision. She stood at perfect attention, eyes forward, breathing controlled, displaying the kind of military bearing that should have earned recognition, but somehow always blended into the collective competence of the formation. The weather forecast had called for clear skies and temperatures reaching 95 degrees by midday, typical conditions for late September in the Nevada desert. A light breeze carried the scent of sagebrush and dust across the training ground, while distant mountains shimmered in the gradually intensifying heat. The flag at the center of the compound hung limp in the still air, its red, white, and blue colors stark against the pale morning sky. Captain Bradley Morrison had briefed the training cadre the previous evening about increased emphasis on combat readiness assessments. Recent deployments had highlighted deficiencies in close-quarters combat skills among newly graduated soldiers, leading to revised training protocols that placed greater stress on realistic engagement scenarios. The directive from Fort Meridian's command structure was clear. Recruits needed to be tested under conditions that more closely approximated actual combat situations. Staff Sergeant Voss had interpreted these instructions through his own philosophy of military preparation, which held that soldiers could only be trusted in life or death situations if they had been pushed beyond their perceived limitations during training. His approach emphasized psychological pressure, physical exhaustion, and unexpected challenges designed to reveal character flaws before they could prove fatal in operational environments. The other drill instructors had grown accustomed to his methods, recognizing their effectiveness while occasionally questioning their intensity. During morning inspection, Voss had noted Private Kane's consistent excellence with the same mixture of approval and suspicion that he applied to all high-performing recruits. In his experience, soldiers who appeared too perfect were often hiding vulnerabilities that would emerge at the worst possible moments. He had made a mental note to test Kane more rigorously during the day's combat exercises, not from personal animosity, but from professional obligation to ensure every soldier under his supervision was genuinely prepared for military service. The first 2 hours of training proceeded according to schedule. Delta Company completed a 5-mile tactical march through the desert terrain surrounding Fort Meridian, practicing movement techniques while carrying full combat loads. Private Kane maintained her position in the formation's middle ranks, matching pace with mathematical precision, helping struggling teammates without drawing attention to herself, and navigating the challenging terrain with the kind of effortless competence that had become her trademark. Following the march, the company moved through weapons maintenance exercises that tested their ability to disassemble, clean, and reassemble their assigned rifles under time pressure and adverse conditions. Sand had been deliberately introduced into the weapons mechanisms to simulate field conditions, and recruits were required to restore full functionality within strict time limits. Private Kane completed the exercise in half the allotted time, her movements flowing with practiced efficiency, but she used the remaining minutes to assist fellow recruits rather than seeking recognition for her performance. Morning's activities had revealed the same pattern that characterized every training day since Delta Company's formation. Private Kane consistently performed at levels that should have marked her as exceptional, yet somehow managed to accomplish these feats without attracting the sustained attention that typically accompanied such achievement. Her instructors noted her scores, recorded her completion times, and moved on to the next recruit, as if her excellence had become so routine as to be unremarkable. As the company prepared for hand-to-hand combat training, the atmosphere began to shift subtly. This particular exercise required recruits to demonstrate their ability to neutralize opponents using techniques learned over the previous 8 weeks, with drill instructors serving as adversaries to ensure realistic resistance and proper form evaluation. The psychological pressure was intentionally intense, designed to test not just physical skills but mental resilience under stress. Private Kane had drawn Staff Sergeant Voss as her assigned opponent, a pairing that would prove more significant than anyone could have anticipated. As she took her position on the combat mat, adjusting her protective gear and preparing for the engagement, nothing in her demeanor suggested she viewed this encounter as anything other than another training exercise to be completed with the same quiet competence she brought to every military task. The other recruits formed a circle around the mat, some nervous about their own upcoming demonstrations, others curious to see how the consistently excellent but unassuming Kane would perform against the most demanding instructor in their training cadre. The morning sun had climbed higher, casting sharp shadows across the training ground and creating the kind of harsh lighting that would make the coming confrontation even more dramatic. None of the observers realized they were about to witness an incident that would trigger security protocols dormant for years, bringing consequences that would reach far beyond the boundaries of training ground. Charlie and fundamentally alter everything they thought. They knew about the quiet recruit who had spent 8 weeks hiding in plain sight among them. Hand-to-hand combat demonstration began routinely enough, with Staff Sergeant Voss calling Private Kane to the center mat while explaining the exercise parameters to the assembled recruits. The objective was straightforward: demonstrate defensive techniques against an aggressive opponent, show proper form in counterattack maneuvers, and maintain composure under physical pressure. What started as standard military training would escalate into something far more serious within minutes. "All right, Kane," Voss announced, adjusting his protective gear and adopting a combat stance. "Let's see if 8 weeks of training actually stuck. Or if you're just another recruit who looks good on paper but folds when things get real." His tone carried the familiar edge of professional skepticism. But there was something more personal in his voice, a hint of the confrontation that had been building since he first noticed Kane's effortless competence. The initial exchanges followed expected patterns. Voss threw controlled punches and kicks, testing Kane's defensive reactions and her ability to maintain proper stance under pressure. She responded with textbook precision, blocking attacks with efficient movements and demonstrating the techniques they had practiced extensively over the past month. Her performance was solid, competent, and utterly unremarkable, exactly what observers had come to expect from the recruit who excelled without fanfare. But as the demonstration continued, Staff Sergeant Voss began increasing the intensity beyond normal training parameters. His strikes came faster, with greater force, testing limits that pushed the exercise toward actual combat rather than instructional demonstration. The other recruits noticed the shift, their casual attention sharpening into concern as they watched their drill instructors' controlled aggression transform into something more personal and dangerous. "Is that all you've got?" Voss taunted, throwing a combination that forced Kane to retreat across the mat. "All those perfect scores don't mean much when someone's actually trying to hurt you, do they?" His breathing had grown heavier, not from exertion but from the kind of escalating anger that experienced soldiers recognized. As a warning sign of impending loss of control, Private Kane continued, responding with the same measured competence she brought to every challenge. But careful observers began noticing subtle changes in her movement patterns. Her defensive techniques remained textbook perfect, but there was an economy of motion, an efficiency of response, that suggested capabilities beyond standard recruit training. She seemed to anticipate Voss's attacks fractionally before they developed, positioning herself with split-second timing that spoke of extensive combat experience. The confrontation reached its tipping point when Voss, frustrated by his inability to break through Kane's defenses, abandoned the pretense of instructional demonstration entirely. "You think you're better than everyone else, don't you?" he snarled, throwing a vicious right cross that had nothing to do with training objectives and everything to do with personal dominance. "Time to learn what real combat feels like." Kane deflected the punch with a movement so fluid it appeared effortless, but the deflection itself revealed something that made several observers step back in surprise. Her counter-movement had been executed with the kind of precision that took years to develop. The automatic response of someone who had faced genuine life-or-death situations, far beyond anything found in military training environments. For just a moment, her carefully maintained facade of ordinary competence had slipped, revealing glimpses of expertise that belonged to an entirely different level of military experience. Staff Sergeant Voss saw the deflection as defiance rather than skill, interpreting her competence as disrespect for his authority. His face flushed red with anger as he abandoned all pretense of controlled training exercise. "You want to embarrass me in front of my recruits?" he shouted, his voice carrying across the training ground. "Let's see how tough you really are when the gloves come off." The situation spiraled beyond anyone's ability to control as Voss threw his next punch with the full intention of causing real harm. This wasn't training anymore. It was an assault driven by wounded pride and professional insecurity. The punch was aimed at Kane's face with enough force to cause serious injury, delivered with the kind of vicious intent that crossed every line, separating instruction from abuse. Private Kane had a split second to make a decision that would determine not just her immediate safety, but the fate of the carefully constructed identity she had maintained for 8 weeks. She could continue playing the role of ordinary recruit, accepting the blow and hoping someone would intervene before serious damage was done. Or she could respond with the full extent of her real capabilities, revealing skills that would immediately mark her as something far beyond a standard military trainee. The choice was taken from her hands when her body reacted with trained instincts that had been developed through years of situations where hesitation meant death. Her defensive movement was so fast it seemed a blur, a counter technique executed with the kind of devastating precision that belonged to special operations training rather than basic military instruction. Staff Sergeant Voss found himself on the ground before he fully understood what had happened. His arm twisted in a submission hold that could have easily been turned into something permanently damaging. For exactly 3 seconds, the training ground fell completely silent. Every recruit, every instructor, every observer stared at the scene with the kind of shocked disbelief that comes from witnessing something that challenges fundamental assumptions about reality. Private Kane, the quiet, unassuming soldier who had spent 2 months blending invisibly into formations, had just demonstrated combat skills that belonged to an entirely different category of military experience. But Staff Sergeant Voss's humiliation and rage had passed the point where rational thinking could prevail. As Kane released the hold and stepped back, offering her hand to help him up in a gesture that should have diffused the situation, his anger exploded into the kind of violent fury that would destroy his career and trigger consequences beyond anything he could imagine. "You think you're some kind of special forces badass?" he screamed, ignoring her offered assistance and rolling to his feet with murderous intent. "I'll show you what happens to recruits who forget their place." The blow that followed would activate security protocols that had been dormant for years, bringing revelations that would transform everyone's understanding of exactly who Private Alexis Kane really was. The moment Staff Sergeant Voss's fist connected with Private Kane's jaw, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of Training Ground Charlie. The crack of impact echoed across the desert training facility with a finality that marked the end of normal military protocol and the beginning of something unprecedented. Kane staggered backward from the force of the blow, blood immediately beginning to flow from her split lip. But her reaction was unlike anything the assembled recruits had witnessed during their weeks of training together. Instead of crying out in pain or shock, instead of falling to the ground in defeat or confusion, Private Kane straightened slowly and deliberately. Her movements carried a controlled precision that seemed to operate independently of the physical trauma she had just endured. Blood trickled down her chin, staining the front of her training uniform, but her breathing remained steady and measured. Most remarkably, her eyes showed no surprise whatsoever, as if she had been expecting this moment and had already calculated her response. The 31 other recruits standing in formation around the combat mat found themselves witnessing something that challenged their understanding of how people responded to sudden violence. Private Thompson later described the moment. It was like watching someone flip a switch inside themselves. 1 second she was the quiet Kane we all knew, and the next second she was someone completely different. Not angry, not scared, just ready. What none of the observers could see was the small device clipped to Kane's belt, now pulsing with urgent red light as sophisticated sensors detected the impact trauma and automatically transmitted emergency signals through encrypted military networks. The device had been programmed to recognize specific threat patterns and respond with protocols that existed far above the classification level of anyone present at the training exercise. Within "You think you're some kind of special forces badass?" he screamed, ignoring her offered assistance and rolling to his feet with murderous intent. "I'll show you what happens to recruits who forget their place." The blow that followed would activate security protocols that had been dormant for years, bringing revelations that would transform everyone's understanding of exactly who Private Alexis Kane really was. The moment Staff Sergeant Voss's fist connected with Private Kane's jaw, something fundamental shifted in the atmosphere of Training Ground Charlie. The crack of impact echoed across the desert training facility with a finality that marked the end of normal military protocol and the beginning of something unprecedented. Kane staggered backward from the force of the blow, blood immediately beginning to flow from her split lip. But her reaction was unlike anything the assembled recruits had witnessed during their weeks of training together. Instead of crying out in pain or shock, instead of falling to the ground in defeat or confusion, Private Kane straightened slowly and deliberately. Her movements carried a controlled precision that seemed to operate independently of the physical trauma she had just endured. Blood trickled down her chin, staining the front of her training uniform, but her breathing remained steady and measured. Most remarkably, her eyes showed no surprise whatsoever, as if she had been expecting this moment and had already calculated her response. The 31 other recruits, standing in formation around the combat mat, found themselves witnessing something that challenged their understanding of how people responded to sudden violence. Private Thompson later described the moment. It was like watching someone flip a switch inside themselves. One second she was the quiet Kane we all knew, and the next second she was someone completely different. Not angry, not scared, just ready. What none of the observers could see was the small device clipped to Kane's belt, now pulsing with urgent red light as sophisticated sensors detected the impact trauma and automatically transmitted emergency signals through encrypted military networks. The device had been programmed to recognize specific threat patterns and respond with protocols that existed far above the classification level of anyone present at the training exercise. Within seconds of Voss's punch, automated systems were initiating responses that would bring consequences cascading down from the highest levels of military command. Staff Sergeant Voss, still consumed by rage and humiliation, interpreted Kane's controlled reaction as continued defiance of his authority. "Still think you're tough?" he snarled, advancing toward her with clear intent to continue the assault. "We'll see how special you are when I'm finished with you." His hands were clenched into fists, his face twisted with the kind of fury that had moved far beyond any reasonable training objective. But as Voss prepared to throw another punch, Kane's response revealed capabilities that transformed the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Her defensive movement was executed with such fluid precision that it seemed to bend the laws of physics, a technique that belonged to special operations training rather than standard military instruction. She didn't just block his attack. She redirected his momentum and energy in a way that sent him stumbling backward while simultaneously positioning herself in a stance that promised devastating consequences if he continued his assault. The technique lasted perhaps 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds revealed years of training that no recruit should have possessed. Her footwork showed the kind of balance and positioning that took decades to master. Her hand movements demonstrated knowledge of pressure points and leverage, principles that were taught only in the most advanced military combat programs. Most telling of all, her tactical awareness during the exchange showed she was simultaneously calculating multiple response options while monitoring the positions and reactions of every person in the surrounding area. Private Rodriguez, standing in the front row of observers, found himself stepping backward involuntarily. "That wasn't basic training stuff," he whispered to the recruit beside him. "That was something else entirely. Something professional." Other recruits began murmuring among themselves. their voices carrying the kind of nervous energy that comes from realizing they were witnessing something far beyond their understanding or experience. The training cadre members present, 2 corporals, and a sergeant who had been observing the demonstrations, exchanged glances that mixed professional concern with growing bewilderment. They had overseen thousands of combat training exercises over their combined years of service, but they had never seen a recruit demonstrate the kind of advanced capabilities that Kane had just displayed. Her technique suggested not just extensive training, but recent operational experience that belonged to military specialties far above the level of basic infantry instruction. Staff Sergeant Voss, however, was too consumed by his own wounded pride to recognize the implications of what he had just witnessed. Kane's competent defense only increased his determination to reassert dominance through violence. "You want to show off?" he shouted, his voice carrying across the training ground. "Let's see how you handle this." He lunged forward with both hands extended, clearly intending to grab her and use his superior size and weight to overwhelm whatever techniques she might have learned. Kane's response to this escalated attack was a masterpiece of tactical precision that left no doubt about her true capabilities. She didn't just defend herself. She systematically dismantled Voss's assault with a series of movements that belonged to the highest levels of military combat training. Her counterattack was executed with such controlled efficiency that it appeared almost choreographed, each element flowing seamlessly into the next, while maintaining perfect awareness of her surroundings and potential collateral effects. Within 5 seconds, Staff Sergeant Voss found himself flat on his back, completely immobilized by a joint lock that could have easily resulted in permanent injury had Kane chosen to apply additional pressure. The technique she had used was so advanced that even the experienced training cadre members couldn't immediately identify its origin or classification. More importantly, the speed and precision with which she had executed the maneuver left no question that these were not skills acquired during 8 weeks of basic training. The training ground fell into absolute silence as everyone present processed what they had just witnessed. Private Kane stood over the immobilized Voss, maintaining the submission hold with effortless control while blood continued to drip from her split lip. Her breathing remained steady, her posture alert but relaxed, and her eyes constantly scanning the surrounding area with the kind of tactical awareness that spoke of extensive combat experience. But rather than ending the confrontation, Kane's demonstration of superior combat skills only intensified Voss's humiliation and rage as she released the hold and stepped back, offering him the opportunity to end the situation with whatever dignity he could salvage. "Sir, we have a level 9 emergency alert from one of our training areas," Holloway reported, her voice professionally controlled despite the unprecedented nature of the situation. "Automated systems are indicating that someone with the highest possible security clearance is currently under physical assault by training personnel. The alert includes medical trauma indicators and requests for immediate intervention." The silence on the other end of the line lasted exactly 4 seconds, long enough for General Harrison to access classified databases and confirm what the alert system was telling him. When he spoke again, his voice carried the kind of absolute authority that comes from understanding the full implications of a critical situation. "Initiate Condition Alpha protocols immediately," he commanded. "Lockdown training ground Charlie, nobody in or out without my direct authorization. Scramble the response team and have them prepared for immediate deployment. I want 4 colonels en route to that location within the next 3 minutes. And I want complete communications blackout on this incident until we understand what we're dealing with." As the general's orders cascaded through Fort Meridian's command structure, a carefully orchestrated emergency response began unfolding with precision that spoke to years of preparation for exactly this type of scenario. Colonel Sarah Mitchell, the base's intelligence officer, was pulled from a routine briefing and directed to report immediately to the motor pool with full tactical gear. Colonel David Chen, responsible for Special Operations Coordination, received similar orders while reviewing personnel files in his office. Colonel Rebecca Torres, Fort Meridian's liaison to classified military programs, was in the middle of a secure video conference with Pentagon officials when her aide burst into the room with emergency orders that superseded all other priorities. The conversation she was having, dealing with budget allocations for overseas training programs, was immediately terminated as she grabbed her equipment and headed for the door. The fourth colonel, James Bradford, had been conducting a routine inspection of the base's ammunition storage facilities when his radio crackled with orders that sent him racing toward the command center. As the base's security chief, he had clearance that granted him access to information about certain special personnel assignments, but even his briefings hadn't included specific details about the individual whose emergency alert was currently triggering the most serious response protocols in Fort Meridian's operational history. Meanwhile, at Training Ground Charlie, Staff Sergeant Derek Voss was making the final decision that would end his military career. As he climbed to his feet from the combat mat, his humiliation and rage had reached levels that completely overrode any remaining professional judgment. The fact that a recruit had demonstrated superior combat skills, that she had effortlessly neutralized his attacks, that 31 other soldiers had witnessed his defeat, all of these factors combined to push him past any rational consideration of consequences. "You think you're some kind of special operations badass?" Voss screamed, his voice carrying across the training ground with undisguised fury. "I don't care what kind of training you think you have. You're just another recruit, and I'm going to teach you what happens when recruits forget their place in the chain of command." Private Kane stood motionless as Voss approached. Blood still trickling from her split lip, her stance relaxed but ready. The other recruits had formed a wider circle around the combat mat, their earlier discomfort now transformed into genuine fear as they watched their drill instructor prepare to assault a fellow soldier. Several of them later reported knowing that they were witnessing something that had moved far beyond training into criminal behavior. But none felt capable of intervening against a staff sergeant's authority. "Stand down, Sergeant," Kane said quietly, her voice carrying just enough authority to suggest that she was accustomed to giving orders rather than receiving them. "This doesn't have to go any further." The tone was respectful but firm, spoken with the kind of professional composure that belongs to someone comfortable with command. Responsibility. But Voss interpreted her words as the ultimate insult, a recruit presuming to give orders to a staff sergeant. His response was immediate and vicious, a backhanded strike delivered with the full intention of causing maximum physical and psychological damage. The blow connected with Kane's face with a sound that made several recruits wince and step backward, sending her staggering across the mat, with blood now flowing freely from both her nose and her previously split lip. The second assault triggered the final sequence of automated responses that had been building since the first alert. Deep within the communications center's secure servers, recognition protocols activated that had been dormant for years. The device monitoring Kane's vital signs transmitted not just medical data, but identification codes that instantly connected to classified databases spanning multiple government agencies. Within 30 seconds of Voss's second attack, secure phone lines began ringing in offices across the Pentagon, the CIA, and other agencies whose very existence was classified above the level of normal military operations. The quiet recruit who had spent 8 weeks invisible among Delta Company's formation was about to reveal an identity that would shock everyone present and destroy the career of the staff sergeant who had Just made the worst decision of his professional life. As 4 colonels raced across Fort Meridian toward Training Ground Charlie. None of them fully understood what they would find there, but all of them knew that they were responding to a situation involving someone whose true identity was protected by the highest levels of national security classification. The 4 colonels' vehicles converged on Training Ground Charlie with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke to years of coordinated emergency responses. Their black SUVs kicked up clouds of Nevada dust as they approached the training area, emergency lights flashing in patterns that immediately identified them as carrying the highest levels of military authority. The sight of senior officers responding to what appeared to be a routine training exercise sent ripples of confusion and apprehension through the base personnel who witnessed their urgent passage. Colonel Sarah Mitchell was the first to exit her vehicle, her intelligence officer's training immediately assessing the tactical situation as she surveyed the scene before her. 32 recruits stood in an irregular formation around a combat mat where 2 figures faced each other, one a blood-covered soldier in training fatigues, the other a staff sergeant whose posture radiated aggressive intent. The body language of everyone present told a story of escalating violence and complete breakdown of normal training protocols. "Sergeant Voss!" Colonel Mitchell's voice cut across the training ground with the kind of absolute authority that instantly froze every person present. "Step away from the recruit immediately and assume the position of attention." Her command carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question, backed by rank insignia that represented authority far above anything normally seen at basic training facilities. "Staff!" Sergeant Voss turned toward the approaching officers, his face still flushed with rage but now showing the first signs of confusion as he recognized the unprecedented nature of the response to what he had assumed was an internal training matter. 4 full colonels, emergency vehicles, and the kind of urgent mobilization typically reserved for national security incidents, all focused on his process. Confrontation with a single recruit who should have been completely insignificant in the broader scope of military operations. Colonel David Chun positioned himself with tactical awareness that immediately established control over the situation's geometry, his special operations background evident in how he surveyed potential threats, while maintaining visual contact with all personnel present. His eyes lingered on Private Kane for several seconds, noting details that weren't immediately apparent to casual observation: her stance, her breathing patterns, the way she held herself despite the obvious injuries she had sustained. "Medical team to Training Ground Charlie immediately," Colonel Rebecca Torres spoke into her radio, her liaison experience with classified programs evident in how she coordinated multiple response elements simultaneously. "We need trauma assessment and documentation photography. Also dispatch security personnel to establish a perimeter. Nobody enters or leaves this area without direct authorization." Colonel James Bradford, as security chief, began the process that would formally document every aspect of the incident while ensuring that sensitive information remained protected. His first priority was identifying exactly who was present and what they had witnessed, understanding that the situation had moved far beyond routine military discipline into territory that required careful management of classified implications. Private Kane stood motionless throughout the colonel's arrival, blood continuing to flow from her facial injuries, but her posture remaining alert and professionally composed. To the assembled recruits, she appeared to be maintaining the same quiet dignity that had characterized her behavior throughout 8 weeks of training. But the 4 colonels approaching her saw something entirely different, recognition flickering in their eyes as they processed information that connected her appearance to classified briefings and personnel files that existed far above normal military channels. "Private Alexis Kane," Colonel Mitchell said, her voice carrying a tone of professional respect that seemed completely inappropriate for addressing a basic training recruit. "Are you injured seriously enough to require immediate medical evacuation?" The question was phrased with the kind of careful consideration typically reserved for addressing personnel of significant importance rather than standard military trainees. The other recruits exchanged bewildered glances as they witnessed their drill instructors and training cadre being systematically displaced by senior officers whose attention seemed focused entirely on the quiet soldier they had known as an unremarkable member of their formation. Private Thompson later described the surreal quality of watching Colonel Street Kane with what appeared to be deferential professional courtesy while she stood bleeding from assault injuries. Staff Sergeant Voss's confusion was rapidly transforming into the first stirrings of genuine fear as he began to comprehend that his actions had triggered responses that reached far beyond anything he had anticipated. "Sir, I was conducting routine combat training," he began, his voice showing the first tremors of someone realizing that their understanding of the situation was fundamentally flawed. This recruit was showing disrespect for authority and needed to be corrected according to standard disciplinary procedures. Colonel Chun's response was delivered with the kind of controlled intensity that immediately silenced any further attempts at justification. "Sergeant, you will remain silent until specifically authorized to speak. You are being relieved of all training responsibilities pending a full investigation into your conduct. Military police are en route to escort you to detention pending formal charges." The mention of formal charges sent shockwaves through the assembled personnel as they began to realize that they were witnessing something far more serious than a training incident gone wrong. The arrival of 4 colonels, the mobilization of emergency response teams, and now the prospect of criminal charges against a staff sergeant, all focused on what had appeared to be a routine combat exercise involving an unremarkable recruit. Private Rodriguez, standing in the front row of observers, found himself studying Kane's interactions with the senior officers and noticing details that hadn't been apparent during 8 weeks of shared training. The way she responded to their questions suggested familiarity with military protocol that extended far beyond basic instruction. Her posture, despite her injuries, maintained the kind of professional bearing that spoke to extensive experience with command-level interactions. Colonel Torres was conducting a quiet conversation on her secure radio, her words carefully chosen to avoid revealing classified information, while coordinating with agencies whose involvement suggested implications far beyond routine military discipline. "Confirm identity verification through Blackwater protocols," she said, using terminology that none of the training personnel recognized, but which carried obvious significance for the officers present. As medical personnel arrived and began documenting Kane's injuries, Colonel Bradford initiated formal evidence collection procedures that treated the incident as a potential criminal assault rather than a training accident. The photographs, statements, and physical evidence being gathered would support legal proceedings that could result in court-martial charges carrying significant prison sentences. Assembled recruits watched in growing amazement as their understanding of both Private Kane and the military justice system underwent fundamental revision. The quiet soldier they had known as competent but unremarkable was receiving treatment normally reserved for personnel of considerable importance, while their drill instructor faced the prospect of career-ending consequences for actions he had assumed were within his authority. But the most significant revelation was yet to come. As Colonel Mitchell prepared to ask the question that would finally expose the true identity of the recruit whose presence at Fort Meridian had been protected by security classifications that reached the highest levels of national defense planning, Colonel Mitchell approached Private Kane with the measured steps of someone who understood they were about to reveal information that would fundamentally alter everyone's perception of reality. The medical team had completed their initial assessment, confirming facial trauma consistent with deliberate assault while documenting injuries that would support serious criminal charges against Staff Sergeant Voss. But the medical evaluation was merely procedural. The real significance of this moment lay in the classified revelation that was about to unfold. Private Kane, Colonel Mitchell began, her voice carrying the formal tone reserved for addressing personnel whose true status required careful protocol management. For the record and in the presence of witnesses, please state your full name, rank, and service identification. The request seemed routine to the assembled recruits, but the four colonels understood they were initiating a disclosure process that had been carefully planned for exactly this type of emergency situation. Kane wiped blood from her mouth with the back of her hand, her movements deliberate and controlled despite the trauma she had endured. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that seemed to emerge from years of command experience rather than 8 weeks of basic training. Major Alexandra Kane, United States Army Intelligence and Security Command. Service number classified, currently assigned to Operation Deepwater. Undercover designation, Private Alexis Kane. The silence that followed her statement was so complete that the only sounds audible across Training Ground Charlie were the desert wind and the distant hum of emergency vehicles. Every recruit, every training instructor, every observer present found themselves processing information that challenged their fundamental understanding of military hierarchy, classified operations, and the true nature of the person they had known as a quiet, unremarkable member of Delta Company. Private Thompson, standing 15 feet away, felt his knees weaken as he realized he had been sharing barrack space with a major whose real assignment involved intelligence operations that operated far above his security clearance. "She's been a major this whole time?" he whispered to Rodriguez, who was staring at Kane with the kind of shocked recognition that comes from suddenly understanding that every interaction over the past 8 weeks had been part of an elaborate cover operation. Staff Sergeant Voss's face drained of color as the implications of what he had just heard penetrated his consciousness. He had not merely assaulted a recruit during training, he had physically attacked a superior officer, engaged in classified operations that required the highest levels of security protection. The realization that his career was not just over, but that he faced potential treason charges for compromising national security operations sent him staggering backward in disbelief. Colonel Chun stepped forward, his special operations background enabling him to appreciate the complexity of maintaining deep cover assignments within regular military units. "Major Kane, how long have you been operating under this cover assignment?" His question was delivered with the professional respect due to a fellow field operative whose mission had required exceptional dedication and personal sacrifice. 14 months total, Kane replied, her voice steady despite the blood still trickling from her injuries. 8 months at Fort Henderson conducting infiltration assessment of training security protocols. 6 months here at Fort Meridian, evaluating personnel reliability and operational security compliance. Her response revealed that her assignment to Delta Company had been far from random. She had been systematically testing the military's ability to detect and respond to potential security threats. The training cadre members present, corporals and sergeants who had been evaluating Kane's performance for weeks, found themselves realizing that they had been the subjects of evaluation rather than the evaluators. Every interaction, every assessment, every routine procedure had been observed and analyzed by someone whose real mission involved identifying vulnerabilities in military training systems that could be exploited by hostile intelligence services. Colonel Torres was coordinating with multiple agencies through her secure communications, her liaison responsibilities requiring her to manage the broader implications of a blown cover operation. "We need immediate relocation protocols initiated," she spoke into her encrypted radio. "Operation Deepwater has been compromised and requires full extraction procedures. Also notify Pentagon oversight that we have a Level 1 security breach involving assault on a classified operative." Major Kane's true identity began explaining details that had puzzled observers throughout her time at Fort Meridian. Her exceptional marksmanship scores, her intuitive understanding of advanced tactical procedures, her ability to troubleshoot sophisticated equipment. All of these capabilities now made perfect sense as the skills of an intelligence officer with extensive field experience rather than the mysterious talents of an unusually gifted recruit. Sergeant Rodriguez, who had been monitoring communications during Kane's time at the base, suddenly understood why certain routine reports had been classified above his clearance level. The perfect scores, the technical knowledge, the way she helped everyone without taking credit, he said to his assistant. She wasn't trying to excel at training, she was conducting professional assessment of our entire program. The assembled recruits were processing the revelation that someone they had lived and trained alongside for 8 weeks had been operating under a completely fabricated identity for national security purposes. Private Walsh, Kane's bunkmate, later described feeling simultaneously betrayed and awed by the realization that her closest training companion had been maintaining an elaborate deception while genuinely caring for the welfare of her fellow soldiers. Colonel Bradford was initiating security protocols that would ensure the classified nature of Kane's assignment remained protected despite the public nature of its compromise. "All personnel present are hereby bound by national security obligations," he announced to the formation. "Any discussion of today's events outside official channels constitutes a potential violation of federal law and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of military justice." Staff Sergeant Voss, now understanding the full magnitude of his actions, attempted one final justification for his behavior. "I had no way of knowing," he said, his voice breaking with the realization that ignorance would provide no protection against the charges he faced. "She was just another recruit in my training company. How was I supposed to know she was operating undercover?" Major Kane's response demonstrated the professionalism that had enabled her to maintain her cover for over a year while conducting one of the military's most sensitive internal security assessments. "Sergeant Voss, your lack of knowledge regarding my actual assignment does not excuse assault on any soldier under your command. The fact that I happen to be a major conducting classified operations is irrelevant to your decision to use violence against someone you believe to be a subordinate." Her words carried the weight of someone accustomed to command responsibility, revealing the leadership experience that had been carefully hidden beneath 8 weeks of deferential behavior toward training personnel. The transformation from quiet recruit to authoritative field operative was complete, exposing the true professional competence that had been disguised as ordinary military aptitude. As the 4 colonels coordinated the complex process of managing a compromised intelligence operation while ensuring appropriate consequences for Voss's criminal behavior, the broader implications of the incident began emerging. Major Kane's cover had been blown, but her mission had also revealed critical vulnerabilities in military training security that would require immediate attention from the highest levels of defense planning. 6 months after the incident at Training Ground Charlie, the reverberations of Major Alexandra Kane's exposed identity continued to reshape military training protocols across multiple installations. The comprehensive report she submitted following her extraction had identified 17 critical security vulnerabilities in standard recruit processing procedures, leading to systematic overhauls of personnel, screening and operational security measures throughout the armies. Training command structure. Major Kane had returned to her primary assignment with Army Intelligence and Security Command. But her 14 months of undercover work had provided insights that extended far beyond the original scope of Operation Deepwater. Her detailed analysis of how classified personnel could operate undetected within regular military units had become required reading for senior officers responsible for counterintelligence operations, while her recommendations for improved security protocols were being implemented at bases across the continental United States. The court-martial of former Staff Sergeant Derek Voss had concluded 3 months earlier with a verdict that sent shockwaves through the military's non-commissioned officer community. Found guilty of assault on a superior officer, conduct unbecoming and compromising classified operations. He had been sentenced to reduction in rank to private, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, confinement for 18 months, and dismissal from military service with a dishonorable discharge. The severity of his sentence reflected not just the physical assault, but the broader implications of his actions for national security. Operations. The 31 recruits who had witnessed the confrontation had completed their training with a fundamentally altered understanding of military service and the hidden complexities that operated beneath routine procedures. Each had been required to sign additional security agreements and undergo debriefing sessions that emphasized their legal obligations to maintain silence regarding classified aspects of Kane's assignment. Their graduation ceremony had been conducted with unusual attention to operational security, ensuring that no details of their unique training experience would compromise ongoing intelligence operations. Private Jennifer Walsh, Kane's former bunkmate, had struggled with feelings of betrayal and admiration as she processed the revelation that her closest friend during training had been maintaining an elaborate deception for national security purposes. I kept thinking about all the time she helped me with equipment problems or listened to me complain about training, Walsh later confided to military counselors. Knowing that she was really a major conducting intelligence operations makes every conversation feel different in retrospect. Fort Meridian itself had undergone significant changes following the security review triggered by Kane's blown cover. General Harrison had implemented new protocols for monitoring training activities, ensuring that appropriate oversight existed to prevent future incidents of instructor abuse while maintaining the rigorous standards necessary for effective military preparation. The base's reputation had actually been enhanced by its role in exposing critical security vulnerabilities, earning recognition from Pentagon officials for its contribution to improved operational security. The broader military community had absorbed lessons from the incident that extended well beyond intelligence operations. The ease with which a major had operated undetected among basic trainees for 8 weeks had prompted fundamental questions about how well military personnel actually knew their colleagues and subordinates. Leadership training programs began incorporating case studies based on Kane's experience, emphasizing the importance of treating all personnel with appropriate respect regardless of apparent rank or background. Major Kane herself had found the transition back to her regular duties complicated by the complicated notoriety that surrounded her successful deep cover operation. Her superiors recognized that her unique experience had made her one of the military's most valuable assets for understanding internal security threats, leading to assignment as the lead instructor for a new training program designed to prepare intelligence officers for extended undercover missions within military units. The psychological impact of maintaining false identity for over a year while genuinely caring for the welfare of fellow soldiers had required extensive debriefing and counseling support. Kane had formed real friendships during her time as Private Alexis Kane, relationships that had to be carefully managed to protect both operational security and the emotional well-being of personnel who had unknowingly been part of her cover assignment. The hardest part wasn't maintaining the deception, Kane had explained during her post-operation interviews. It was genuinely caring about the success and safety of people who thought they knew me, while understanding that my real mission required me to evaluate their reliability and security awareness. Every friendship felt both authentic and fundamentally dishonest at the same time. Her recommendations for future undercover operations had emphasized the need for enhanced psychological support for operatives conducting long-term identity deception, as well as improved protocols for managing the personal relationships that inevitably developed during extended assignments. The military's understanding of the human cost of intelligence operations had been significantly advanced by her detailed analysis of the emotional challenges inherent in deep cover work. The incident had also prompted broader conversations within military leadership about the appropriate use of force in training environments and the importance of maintaining professional standards regardless of apparent power dynamics. Voss's assumption that he could assault a subordinate with impunity had revealed attitudes that required systematic correction. Throughout the military's command structure, training protocols now included specific instruction on recognizing and reporting instructor abuse, with clear channels for recruits to report inappropriate behavior without fear of retaliation. The military's commitment to protecting all personnel, regardless of rank or assignment, had been strengthened by the recognition that anyone in uniform might be operating under classified orders that required additional consideration and protection. 6 months later, as Major Kane reviewed intelligence reports from multiple ongoing operations, she occasionally reflected on her time as Private Alexis Kane and the recruits who had shared that experience with her. The relationships formed during those 8 weeks had been among the most genuine of her military career, built on shared challenges and mutual support rather than rank structure or professional obligations. Story of the quiet recruit who had been revealed as an intelligence major conducting classified operations had become part of military folklore, a reminder that the most important qualities of military service, competence, dedication, and care for fellow soldiers, could be found at any rank and in any assignment. Her legacy extended beyond operational security improvements to encompass a renewed appreciation for the hidden depths that existed within ordinary seeming military personnel. As new recruits arrived at Fort Meridian for training, their instructors carried the knowledge that exceptional capability and classified purpose might be hidden beneath unremarkable appearances, ensuring that every soldier received the respect and professional treatment that their service deserved, regardless of their apparent status in the military hierarchy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.